this is the most difficult chapter in the Bible. So I said, well, that's nice. Great. So we are going to get through this 11th chapter of the book of Daniel. And to get through chapter 11, we will then get to chapter 12, which if 11 is the most difficult chapter, I'm going to say that chapter 12 is the most exciting in the same way. So let's look at Daniel this morning. We have gone through these chapters. You know, he came as a teenager to Babylon. He was the guy that interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Him and his friends were facing the furnace, as you remember that. And then there was the fall of Babylon. Remember the writing on the wall? Remember the hand came and wrote on the wall. Then the lion's den. Daniel was in the lion's den. And then there were the four beasts that were the four empires. The ram and the he-goat was Alexander the Great. The 70 weeks, which we said 69 weeks have passed. Those weeks were actually years. And there's one set of years left, and that's 7 years. So 483 years have passed. So the total was 490. There's 7 years left, and we know that to be the Great Tribulation period. We know that the clock is stopped right now during this 2,000-year period of grace dispensation. In an era of time when you can just be saved by asking the Lord to forgive you. We're in that 2,000-year period. Daniel didn't know anything about it. He was blind to the church age. There was two mountain peaks. He could see one, which was the cross, the coming of Jesus, and he saw the second one, which was the second coming of Jesus, but he didn't know about the church in that valley in between. And so this morning, in this 11th chapter, we get kind of a glimpse of the silent years. In between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's a period of about 400 years in which there wasn't much writing going on in the scriptures, in the book or in the Bible. But there is one book in the Bible that tells us about those years. And if that's the book of Daniel, there's another book called Ezra. You can look at Ezra. We're written during that period of time. But the book of Daniel really is the main book for this period of time between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And this chapter 11 is an amazing chapter in the Bible because of some of the things that we learn about God. The first thing that we learn about God in this chapter, really, it tells us that He is the God outside the time continuum. You understand that? He is the God outside the time continuum. Now, you and I said this morning, I said it, I was glad because I woke up this morning to see another day in my life. God never has to say that. He never sleeps, by the way. Do you understand that when you're sleeping at night, when you're all tired, that God is still awake and energized? He never sleeps. He's outside this 24-hour period. He doesn't get tired. He is the God outside the time continuum. We know that. God reveals the future to us so that when the time comes, we can see that He knew what He was talking about. That's what prophecy is all about. Prophecy is all about God showing us, giving us the evidence, proving to us, guaranteeing us, gaining our trust, helping us to rely upon Him, understanding who He is, because He's showing us through the scriptures that He knows what's going to happen before it happens. It's kind of a pre-written history, if you would. God reveals the future to us so that when the time comes, we can see that He knew what He was talking about. You ever have anybody see, I told you so kind of thing? You hate to hear it. You just hate to hear it. God is kind of a I told you so kind of God. He's like, I told you that's what was going to happen. And that He is who He says that He is. He's the God outside the time continuum. He's outside of all of this. None of this is affecting God whatsoever. Only the God outside the time continuum could know the beginning from the end. To God, it doesn't matter. He can play it like from the end all the way back to the beginning if He wants to, because He knows the end as well as he knows the beginning. God doesn't matter to God. He can look at it either way you want him to look at it, and he knows about both of those things. In this chapter, God reveals to Daniel what is going to happen in the future. Now, most of this in chapter 11 has already happened. It happened in that 400-year period of time between the Old and New Testament. So he is going to share with Daniel all about the details with great accuracy, names, times, dates, situations, everything. And so the angel from chapter 10, remember in chapter 10, there was an angel talking to Daniel. And so this same angel, who was the angel? Gabriel, right? Gabriel was talking in chapter 10. And so it's interesting to me when I'm sitting there thinking about all this, that one of the chapters in the Bible was actually written by an angel. We always think about Daniel. We think about Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, Peter, but we never think about Gabriel as being one of the book writers. Anybody in here ever think about Gabriel as a book writer? Gabriel wrote the 11th chapter of the Bible. So most of the prophecy is fulfilled during this intertestamental period of time. So where in the book does this take place? Now, so it's interesting about these chapters in the book of Daniel. They're not quite chronological. They're put in here, but it's interesting about the chapter 11. This takes place during the time that Daniel was cast into the lion's den. So when we read that story back there a couple chapters ago, chapter 11 happened in reality at about the same time chapter 7 was being written. So that's how it goes. King Darius tried to help Daniel get out of the lion's den. He loved Daniel. He didn't want to see it happen. But as these empires degraded, we have one guy, Nebuchadnezzar, ruling a whole empire. Now you had 2 people, then 4 people. Then you had all kinds of people ruling the empire. Darius was stuck in a situation where when he wrote a certain edict or law, he couldn't reverse it. And so they trapped Daniel in by the law that Darius himself had written. So now Darius is trying to help Daniel get out of that lion's den. That's what's taking place. That's when it happened. This angel from the last chapter has come to strengthen the king, Darius, in his effort to help Daniel. So Gabriel came along the side of the king to try to help Daniel. So it's an interesting thing to see how this is all taking place. Remember that in the last chapter, Satan tried to stop what they would call the hardest chapter to understand from being written. He came and he tried to stop it. It was the king of Persia and it was the king of Greece. These are satanic forces. And they were coming against Gabriel, tried to stop Gabriel. And then we hear that Michael, the archangel, comes. Who is the fighter? He's the soldier. I mean, he's the superhero. He's the only one in the Bible called archangel. He's the only one that we're made aware of anyway. I mean, he's the guy you don't want to mess with. So he comes and he helps Gabriel fight these 2 kings of Persia and Greece, which was satanic armies, and they were trying to stop chapter 11 from being written. And so he comes alongside. So let's get into this a little bit. I'm not going to read all these scriptures, obviously, in this chapter. And I'm going to use the KISS principle. We all know what that is, right? There you go. So also in the first year of Darius the Mede, I put it in yellow because, I'm kind of pointing out who's talking, stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Talking about the king. And this is Gabriel talking. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will rise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer, stir up against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule the great dominion and do according to his will. Of course, we know that to be Alexander the Great. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, spread out, pieces and parts, but not among his posterity. In other words, he wanted his son to be the king, but that didn't happen. Nor according to his dominion with which he ruled, or those friends around him, For his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others. So his family didn't get the succeeding rulership. They were tossed out. And so when he died at 32 years old, he basically drank himself to death. He had a party. Remember, he went out for a party one night, came home, it started raining. He got wet, but he was so drunk that he didn't even bother to change clothes, but he went to bed wet, and he got pneumonia, and he died. Just a drunken guy. He had ruled the whole known world at that time and was bored now. He's like, sit down, like, what am I going to do? In other words, he needed to read The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, didn't he? Yeah. If he had had that in his hands, he might have survived to see another day, but he had done everything that he thought in his mind he was supposed to do and didn't know what to do with his life now, and so he just got drunk and he just kind of died. So Alexander the Great conquered pretty much the known world. He came home to Babylon, sat down, and cried because there was nothing left to do. He began to drink and he began to party, and he went to bed wet. He got pneumonia. He died. Simple as that. Now, we're going to talk about only really these two kingdoms, Egypt and Syria. There's 4 kingdoms here, but these two aren't mentioned much in this chapter, and here's the reason why. Because everything in the Bible is always about either us as Christians or Israel as a nation. And so the only two that are affecting the nation of Israel is Egypt and Syria. Israel's stuck right between these two people, and they're always having fights with each other, which means that you ever have 3 people, 2 sitting on each side of you, and you say, let's have a fight between us, and they both start hitting you? That's just an old joke, right? That's these two nations. And Israel's between them. You got one in the north, and you got the king of the south, and they're always fighting each other. And Israel's always caught between these 2 nations. And right away, you can see the king of the south shall come strong. And there's Seleucus, and he shall gain power over him. So it's just a tug of war. There's some successes. There's some losses between the king of the north, the king of the south. And here we have in verse 6, this story about one king giving his daughter to marry the other king's family, the daughter of one kingdom marrying one of the princes of the other for a political reason, so that they would stop fighting each other. But Gabriel says that she shall be given up. In other words, he marries her, then he don't like her. He actually was married already and divorces his wife, marries this daughter of the king from the other nation. Then he doesn't like her, and he divorces her, and he wants his wife back. So she takes him back, and then she poisons him. That's how it goes. And God said it's going to happen. I can see there's some little animosity going on there, I guess. And she poisons him, he dies. So that's what's going on here in this political marriage that took place. Gabriel tells him that it's going to happen. Remember, this is all several hundred years down the road from where Daniel was standing. Then, but from a branch of her roots, that just means family tree. That just means somebody in your family, and it happens to be her brother, shall rise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. In verse 8, and he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, and with the princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And so what wasn't accomplished by the marriage, they took by brute force. When they realized that the marriage wasn't going to help, he divorces her, sends her home, all this stuff. They go in by brute force, and they take that kingdom anyway. Kingdom of the north against the kingdom of the south. Verse 9, the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south. And so if you remember anything about this chapter, you can just say, I know that it was the king of the north who was fighting the king of the south. And I knew that one of them was Egypt and one of them was Syria. And if you want to look on the map, you can see where they was northern, where they was southern. It really, if you look at it, it's not that difficult. But if you're a novice and you're trying to read through the Bible, I heard a lot of people say, you know what, I've read through the Bible 7 times. And I'm thinking, really? Because if I'd got to chapter 11 of Daniel, I had to stop and say, there's no use me reading through this because I don't understand any of it. So somebody reading through the Bible and understanding what they were reading in the Bible, to me, is two totally different things. There's some people that can read really fast, but they have a low comprehension level. You know what I'm saying? They don't retain or understand what they're actually reading. So why should I speed through a book and not understand any of it? Or should I just slow down and say, let's stop a little while and graze here and begin to understand what I'm reading? If I can't comprehend it, I'm wasting my time. So you've got the king of the south. He's moving with rage, and he's going against the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude. In other words, he started with a small group of guys, and he built an army, and this was actually the Maccabees. The Maccabees started whacking the Syrian soldiers with sticks and stones. And then all of a sudden, they started slaughtering thousands of these Syrian soldiers. And so their army started growing, and they got weapons and horses and all this stuff, and they grew great. And then verse 13, the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. So we have all this going on, and we've got a fight between the north and the south, and you've got the glorious land, which is, what is the glorious land? Israel. Always will be called the glorious land. You got all this fighting going on, continues on, and then we got Cleopatra, who's the daughter of women, but she shall not stand with him. Now, this is not Cleopatra as we think of Mark Antony. That was like Cleopatra the seventh. Daughter to the daughter, the daughter, the daughter, the daughter. This was Cleopatra the first. Keep that in mind when you're studying this stuff. And so she comes into play in this prophecy. And then there's the king that dies. His son takes his place, raises a bunch of taxes, but within a few days he was destroyed because they didn't like it, And in this place shall rise a vile person. Now here we come to this king who is a forerunner or a kind of a antichrist kind of figure. And that's whom we'll be talking about in the 12th chapter. To whom they will not give honor of royalty. In other words, he really shouldn't have been, but he shall come in peaceably. In other words, he's going to be got flowery words. He's going to come in, he's going to make himself real likable by giving them what he thinks they want, like a kind of real politician. Politicians are like that. They promise you the moon, they don't give you anything. And they never carry out their promises or carry through on them. But this guy comes in peaceably and seizes the kingdom by intrigue. He didn't have to do anything. He was just talked his way into it. And with the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And so and the prince of the covenant just means a high-ranking priest in the Old Testament. That's all it really means. It means that he killed him even. And so the question, I guess, is why, and I answered just a little order, why we focus on these two kingdoms out of the four, the king of the north, the king of the south, is because they have something to do with Israel. And all prophecy focuses down through the ages on the nation of Israel. Matter of fact, today, if you want to know what's going on in prophecy, look at the nation of Israel. Because the nation of Israel is God's time clock. Does that make sense to you? If you want to know what time it is, look at what's going on in the nation of Israel. And you'll know what time it is. It's God's time clock. It's God's watch, really. And so you have in verse 20, this more of the epiphanies. There shall rise in his place his son, one who imposes taxes. And verse 35, now this gets into really, it's verse 35 that gets into future. We haven't got there yet. Everything that we've talked about now, flying through the chapter 11, has been history. You get to 35, and now it's future. It's now talking about some future events. Look what he says there. He says, for it shall be, because it's still for the appointed time. We're living very close to the appointed time. And that's what he is saying. He's saying, now, what I'm really talking about is something that's going to happen way down there in the corridors of time, down toward the end. But if you want to look at what kind of person this guy's going to be, this king, Antiochus Epiphanes, is a type of Antichrist. And so we're leaping forward in time from that which has already been fulfilled to that which is to come. And so some of these those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, make them white until the time of the end. In other words, there's that 2,000-year period of history. From the time that Christ died till now, it's been about 2,000 years of history, because it's still for an appointed time. In other words, it's going to be after the church age. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. In other words, you're talking about the great tribulation period down there at the end of time. Now, this coincides with 1 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 4. And here's Paul talking now, many years later, and saying the same thing that was being said in Daniel. And Paul says, now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if it was from us, as though the day of Christ had come. There were many in Paul's day saying that Jesus has already come, and a lot of people had missed the boat. Paul said it's not true at all. He hasn't came yet. Verse 3 says, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless there's a falling away that comes first. What is the falling away? We're living in the falling away. Would you not say that this is the falling away? It is. We're living in a very time of church people. It's not a falling away of attendance. I think attendance is up, but I think living's down. Does that make sense? Church attendance is up, but those who are confessing Christians, their living is down. There's a falling away of real, true, heartfelt Christians that really want to believe God and trust his word. And so we have a lot of people in a lot of churches doing a lot of things, but the Bible calls this time a falling away time, and the man of sin is revealed. The son of perdition, verse 4 says, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or is worship, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. I went through and Googled and found that they're very heavily into rebuilding the third temple. And so here's a piece that I found. Ancient Jewish sources indicate that Trump will pave way for third temple. That came from a prominent rabbi. I thought it was kind of cool, you know. It says down here, this was, a matter of fact, if you look at March 22nd, 2018, when it was said, Rome destroyed the second temple, so Rome's descendants, the Christians, are going to amend this by taking part in bringing the third temple, and that was said by this rabbi. And here's another piece, an article. This was in the U.S. News. It says, U.S. ambassador to Israel pictured with controversial image of Jerusalem third temple, replacing the Muslim mosque. So that was May 23rd, just a few days ago, that this was in the news. And they're talking and pointing to the third temple here. And they're holding a picture of what the new temple is going to look like. That's interesting. It tells me that we're really getting close to the fulfillment of another prophecy in the scriptures. So getting through this, the Antichrist will come in great power. In the same way, he came, and he will come again to the throne with a program of peace. You know, where's the problem? The problem right now is between Israel and the Palestinians, right? The Palestinians don't believe that Israel has a right to even exist. So if the Palestinians say, we want peace, what that means to them is when they cease to exist, we'll have peace. But when Israel says we want peace, it means that there has to be a solution where they can live in their area and we can live in our area, and we will stop killing each other. That's what peace means to Israel. So peace means different things to different people. And so that's the difference. Now, this guy will introduce the Great Tribulation with a program of 3.5 years of peace. So when you're watching the news and you finally hear somebody says, well, there's this proposal on the table that there's going to be peace between Israel and the Palestinians, and this is going to be for 3.5 years, you're going to like, wow, where did I hear that from? That sounds familiar to me. I believe that's exactly what the Bible says. So folks thinking they are entering the millennial period, So there's a lot of people say when they see about this peace, can you imagine the stock market when they hear there's going to be peace? It's going to go through the roof. I mean, wow, this finally, peace, right? Finally. Then the Bible says sudden destruction happens. And so this is when the 3.5 years ends. He turns and starts killing Christians and starts killing Jewish people. And so if we're looking this close at a third temple, it could be within the next few years that we see everything that Daniel chapter 11 is talking about and is going to talk about in Daniel chapter 12. So what I'm trying to explain this morning is that it does have an application to your life and where you're living. You say, well, I don't know what Daniel chapter 11 has to do with me. That's old news. No, it's not. It has everything to do with you and your life here in this world. You might think it's about a lot of other things, but I'm going to tell you, God who created you and has allowed you to live in this place called earth, He's brought you here for a reason. Everybody here in this room this morning has a purpose for living and for being here. In other words, you wouldn't be here. If God didn't need you anymore and He didn't have a purpose for your life, you wouldn't have woke up this morning. That's just the way it is. When God's done, you're done. But the good news is God's not finished yet. God's still got something going on in your life. He's got something He wants you to do with your life, and He's giving you second chances, third chances. Amen? 4 chances. How many times will He forgive you, by the way? Every time. 7 times 70. Every time. He'll always forgive you. But boy, I mean, if you could just stop getting stuck in the mud of forgiveness all the time and start moving forward and progressing toward what God wants you to accomplish in this life while you're here. And when He's done with you, He's done with you, and it'll be okay. But you're here because He's got something for you that He wants you to do. And one of those things is to understand His Word and get the good news out to others and help others to understand who God is and the fact that He loves us. He's got a plan for our life. He's got a plan for the Israelites, for the nation of Israel over there. They're still there after all the things that's happened. The Holocaust happened. Millions of Jews were killed. But somehow they survived, come back, and now they're a nation again. It's amazing. Only through the grace of God could that stuff happen. We've had so many trials in our lives, even in our young lives, but you survived them. And you're still here this morning to say hallelujah. Amen. You're still here. That means that God is real, that God is holding true to His promise to you. And He wants you to know that. That's all we're talking about this morning. These people will be deceived thinking they're entering into the millennial period. Oh, now it's 1,000 years that's starting and I'm getting to enjoy that. No, it's going to be hell on earth. That's what it's going to be. You and I, we don't want to be here when this happens. And your children this morning, we don't want them to be here in this world either. Right? We want to be the parent that they need us to be. We want to show them the way, the truth, and the life. We don't want them to be left behind when we're taken out prior to this event that's going to happen called the rapture of the church. Everybody say amen? Amen. Let's stand together this morning. Altar's open this morning for a few minutes if you're here. Need to pray, like to pray, need anointed. We have some oil this morning if you're here.